You're listening to the Valley Current.
You know, usually when we picture a major global conflict, we tend to imagine it as this epic, visceral contest of willpower.
Oh, absolutely, like a movie.
Right, exactly like a movie. We assume the winner will be whoever has the moral high ground or, the most sheer grit, or just whoever can put the most overwhelming military force on the map.
Yeah, you picture generals moving little tanks around on a board, convinced that sheer firepower dictates the outcome.
Totally. But what if that perspective completely misses the underlying mechanics of how these things actually end?
I mean, it's a very human way to look at the world, wanting the righteous or the strongest to win.
Right. But what if winning or losing a war has literally nothing to do with grit or morals or how many stealth bombers you have?
Which is a tough pill to swallow.
It is. What if, when you strip all that emotion away, the outcome is dictated by pure, cold mathematics?
That is a massive paradigm shift.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes the narrative completely out of the equation.
And that really is our mission for this deep dive today. We're looking at this fascinating, kind of mind-bending source.
It's quite the document.
Yeah, it's this leak-style memo. Technically, it's called a Special Geopolitics and Decision Theory Briefing. It was prepared for institutional clients by the Computer Law Group, or CLG, in spring 2026. Specifically May.
And their core objective in this memo is basically explaining why U.S. policymakers just keep getting trapped in unwinnable conflicts.
Right. And their answer is that Washington is flat out refusing to look at the world through the mathematical lens of John Nash's game theory.
They're essentially arguing that these recurring strategic failures aren't about a lack of military might. It's a fundamental lack of mathematical literacy at the highest levels of government.
It's wild. Now, real quick before we get into the weeds on this, we are looking at a think tank memo from 2026 that touches on highly sensitive, ongoing conflict.
Real people, real current political figures.
Exactly. So to be crystal clear with you, the listener, we are not here to take a political side. We aren't endorsing any administration's policies or, validating the specific think tank's worldview.
Right. We are strictly here to unpack their mathematical framework. We're just keeping the politics out of it and looking at the math.
Exactly. So to understand why this brief claims Washington is constantly miscalculating, we first have to understand the rule book they say the rest of the world is playing by.
Which means we need to go back to 1950.
Okay, take us back.
So there's this 22-year-old mathematician named John Nash, right? He submits his doctoral thesis at Princeton, and it was incredibly short for a paradigm-shifting paper.
How short?
Only 27 pages long.
Wow.
Yeah, and it contained exactly 2 citations, and one of them was to his own previous work.
Oh man, that is the ultimate academic flex right there, just as I previously proved.
It really is quite the statement. But those 27 pages completely altered modern game theory. He introduced this concept called the Nash equilibrium.
And the briefing leans heavily on this, right?
Heavily. They define it exactly as Nash did. Basically, an equilibrium is a configuration of choices where no player, acting unilaterally, can do better by changing their strategy.
Given what everyone else is already doing, right?
Exactly. So essentially, everyone has made their move. You look around the board, and no one has any incentive to change their position, because doing so would just make things worse for them personally.
Okay, but the briefing stresses a really crucial detail here, which I think people get wrong. A Nash equilibrium is not inherently a good outcome.
Not at all.
It's not moral. It's often not even efficient. It is simply a self-enforcing outcome, the natural resting point.
Right. When you say John Nash and equilibrium, I bet a lot of people immediately think of that movie.
Oh, A Beautiful Mind.
Yes, A Beautiful Mind.
The famous bar scene with Russell Crowe, where he figures it all out, right? He says, if all the guys go for the blonde, they block each other and get nowhere. So they all agree to go for her brunette friends instead. Everyone gets a date, everybody wins. It makes the equilibrium look like this ultimate cooperative victory.
Well, the author of the briefing actually anticipates people bringing up that exact scene.
Yeah.
And they take great delight in pointing out that it is entirely, completely wrong.
Wait, really? The movie named after the guy gets his core theory wrong?
Completely wrong. The scenario in the movie is not a Nash equilibrium at all.
Okay, you have to explain that.
So the outcome in the movie, where everyone cooperates to maximize the group's benefit, is what economists call Pareto superior.
Pareto superior. Okay, that's a great economics buzzword, but in plain English, that just means a utopian outcome where everyone's better off, right?
Exactly. Everyone is better off, but the math doesn't hold. It's fundamentally unstable.
Because someone's going to cheat.
Precisely. Once the group agrees to ignore the blonde, any single guy in that group suddenly has a massive private incentive to secretly break the agreement.
Oh, right, because if he defects while the others hold back, he has zero competition.
Yes. And because that incentive to defect exists, the cooperative agreement is mathematically doomed.
So the lawyer's craft, or the military strategist's craft, isn't about making utopian promises. It's about finding that actual self-enforcing point where no one even wants to move.
Exactly. You can't rely on group promises, you rely on the math of the stalemate.
Which, if you think about this in your own life, it makes a lot of sense. Whenever you are trapped in a stubborn stalemate at work, or maybe a negotiation for a house where neither the buyer nor seller will budge a single inch.
Right, you feel like you're failing.
Yeah, you aren't failing morally. You've just hit a Nash equilibrium. Neither you nor the other person can move without making your own situation worse.
That's a great way to put it. So if an equilibrium is simply about being stuck, how does that explain a devastating historical loss like the Vietnam War?
Which the briefing talks about a lot.
They do. They argue it comes down to a specific type of equilibrium caused by a clash of time horizons. They call it a patience asymmetry.
Patience asymmetry. And to set this up, the author pulls this quote from Henry Kissinger from January 1969.
Oh, the guerrilla warfare quote.
Yeah. Kissinger wrote, "The guerrilla wins if he does not lose. The conventional army loses if it does not win."
The briefing basically translates that 1969 observation into 1950 Nash vocabulary.
How so?
Think of a conflict where one player has a massively higher payoff for simply continuing the fight indefinitely. The patient player's equilibrium strategy is just to wait.
Because time is on their side.
Right. And the impatient player, whose costs are rising every single day, eventually hits a point where their equilibrium strategy is just to leave.
And the brief lays out the stark reality of this with the math from Vietnam. They compare the adversary's time horizon, the North Vietnamese Revolutionary Project, which spanned from 1945 to 1975.
30 years.
30 years. They compare that against the duration of the U.S. combat presence, and the resulting patience ratio was 3.75 to 1.
Almost 4 times more patient.
Exactly. Their timeline to achieve their goals was just that much longer than the American political tolerance for staying.
And that ratio mathematically forced the U.S. withdrawal. But what's really interesting is how the briefing fast forwards to spring 2026.
Right. They applied this exact same mathematical framework to the ongoing conflict with Iran.
Let's walk through that timeline they provide for early 2026, because the numbers here are just staggering.
Yeah, so on February 28th, there is a joint U.S.-Israel strike that kills the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei.
And then by March 9th, Mojtaba Khamenei is installed as the new leader.
Then in April, a ceasefire is brokered. And the brief notes this wild mix of involvement figures like J.D. Vance, Steve Witkoff, Pakistan's army chief, and Iranian foreign minister Arachi.
A lot of different players trying to freeze things.
Right, but by May, the U.S. president is already describing that ceasefire as being on life support.
And this is where the briefing tells us to look at the contrasting time horizons.
A patience asymmetry again.
Exactly. Think about the U.S. president's timeline. They have a hard, unchangeable electoral terminus.
Because of the 22nd Amendment.
Right. Their constitutional window closes in January 2029. So that gives the U.S. executive branch roughly a 32-month horizon to resolve the conflict.
Just 32 months. Meanwhile, on the other side of the board, the Islamic Republic has been operating as an institutional project for 47 years.
And the brief highlights their specific structure. They operate on what's called a fourth successor, decentralized mosaic defense doctrine.
Let's unpack that for a second. What does a decentralized mosaic defense actually mean on the ground?
It means they have specifically designed their entire military and political structure to absorb decapitation strikes.
So if you eliminate the top leader, the system doesn't just collapse.
No, they already have 4 layers of successors pre-positioned. The military operates in these autonomous, localized cells.
Like a hydra.
Exactly like a hydra. Cut off the head, the body just continues functioning independently. They're architected to survive indefinitely.
So if you divide that 47-year entrenched institutional timeline by the 32-month U.S. political timeline, you get a patience ratio of 17.6.
17.6, that is massive.
The adversary in this 2026 scenario is almost 18 times more patient than the U.S. administration.
And the math? dictates the outcome.
It really reminds me of it's like a multiplayer video game.
How so?
Imagine one player has literally infinite lives and no time limit whatsoever. The other player is playing on a console with a strict 30-minute parental timer.
Ah, right.
Once those 30 minutes are up, the screen goes black. It absolutely does not matter how many weapons the 30-minute player has accumulated or how much in-game damage they can inflict.
The infinite player just has to hide behind a rock until the clock runs out.
Exactly. The 30-minute player loses by default.
That analogy perfectly illustrates a theory the brief cites by this scholar named Robert Pape.
Oh, right, the air power analysis.
Yeah. Pape concluded that punishing a population or a regime from the air almost never forces them to surrender or change their core behavior.
Punishment doesn't work.
Right. The only strategy that reliably works is denial, physically destroying their capacity to wage war.
But since you cannot realistically destroy a decentralized, geographically vast fourth successor system entirely from the air,
the patient player will mathematically outlast the impatient one. The equilibrium is withdrawal.
Which naturally leads to the next scenario in the brief. What happens when you have a time mismatch, but neither side can afford to leave, and neither side can achieve total victory?
That's when the Nash equilibrium shifts into what they call a frozen conflict.
A frozen conflict.
Yeah, and they use the Korean War as the ultimate historical precedent for this.
The Korean Armistice of 1953.
The brief actually describes Panmunjom in 1953 as a 73-year durable Nash equilibrium.
Because the 38th parallel dividing North and South hasn't moved a meter in over 7 decades.
Not an inch. And think about the economic disparity between the two sides. The brief notes a 56x divergence in GDP per capita between South Korea and North Korea.
56 times higher. That is unimaginable.
Yet despite that massive economic gap, despite nuclear proliferation, decades of localized crises, the border remains entirely frozen.
Because the mathematical cost for either side to resume full-scale hostilities far outweighs any plausible gain.
Exactly. Seoul would face catastrophic artillery bombardment, and the North Korean regime would face total annihilation.
It's grim and it's tense, but mathematically it is perfectly stable. Any unilateral move makes the aggressor's situation much, much worse.
And this is where the brief brings it to the present day. They take that 1953 Korea template and apply it directly to the Ukraine conflict as of May 2026.
The data they aggregate here is pretty sobering. They note that Russia controls roughly 20% of Ukraine, which is about 45,737 square miles.
But the critical mathematical indicator the author focuses on isn't the total territory.
It's the rate of change.
Yes. The map has essentially stopped moving. Over a recent year-long period, the brief points out Russia gained an average of only 143 square miles a month.
Which, in the context of a country the size of Ukraine, that statistical change is approaching 0.
And between April and May 2026, they actually lost 45 square miles.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, combined military casualties are nearing 2 million.
Wow. But you hear about all these diplomatic efforts to solve this, right? The brief lists them out. The 2022 Istanbul Communique.
The November 2025 Witkoff-Dmitriev 28-point plan.
Yeah, and the European 19-point counterproposal. But applying game theory, the brief concludes these ceasefires are merely what it calls a regrouping interval.
Right. It introduces this concept from political scientist James Fearon to explain why. They diagnose Ukraine in 2026 as a Fearon Type 2 commitment problem.
Okay, another academic term. Let's walk through what a Type 2 commitment problem actually looks like on the ground. Why can't these two sides just, sign a paper and stop fighting?
So a commitment problem occurs when two parties might actually benefit from a peace deal, but neither side can trust the other to stick to the agreement.
Because there's no higher authority to enforce it. Right?
Exactly. The international system is essentially an anarchy. Russia cannot credibly commit to not invading again in 5 years once they've rebuilt their forces.
It's like agreeing to put down your weapons in a duel, but there's no sheriff in town to make sure the other guy doesn't just shoot you the second your gun hits the dirt.
That is the exact mechanism of the distrust. And because there is no sheriff, the only thing that gives Ukraine the credible security it needs to agree to a peace deal is joining NATO.
But Ukraine joining NATO is Russia's absolute red line for continuing the war.
Right. It's an impossible loop. Neither side can credibly commit to a comprehensive peace treaty without violating their own security requirements.
Therefore, the mathematical equilibrium is not peace.
It's Panmunjom 1953.
The brief predicts the inevitable resting point is a Korean-style armistice.
Right. No formal peace treaty, just an indefinite stalemate along the current line of contact.
Yeah.
A demilitarized buffer zone.
And a long-term, maybe 15-year U.S. security commitment.
Nobody actually wants that specific outcome, but all the other outcomes are mathematically unstable. They will collapse.
Okay, so if a 22-year-old figured out the math behind these equilibria in 1950, why are modern policymakers constantly stunned when these conflicts end in stalemates?
That forms the most pointed critique in the entire document.
Yeah.
The briefing argues that the U.S. national security apparatus simply stopped doing the formal math.
It just stopped.
Yeah. Back in the 1950s and 60s, institutions like the Rand Corporation employed formal game theorists. The Cuban Missile Crisis was managed by people who actively modeled payoffs and applied these exact mathematical frameworks to nuclear standoffs.
But the brief argues that era is over. Today, U.S. policy is driven by lawyers and area studies PhDs.
Who deeply understand history, culture, international law.
But they do not mathematically model strategic payoffs.
No, they don't. Meanwhile, adversaries, and the brief explicitly names the PRC in Russia here, still heavily emphasize formal strategic analysis in their military academies.
They are playing a cold game of math, while Washington is playing a game of narratives and historical analogies.
And to illustrate this disconnect, the brief brings in a fascinating parameter from an April 2026 academic paper by Chimera, Nguyen, and Bierman.
Oh boy.
It's titled Evolutionarily Optimal Risk Aversion. And it introduces the lambda parameter.
Okay, you're going to have to slow down. We just jumped from global geopolitics to Greek letters.
Yeah.
What is a lambda parameter, and why should a voter or a policymaker care about it?
So the lambda parameter, represented by the Greek letter lambda, is a way to measure how an agent processes information.
Okay.
Specifically, it represents the relative confidence an agent places on their own internal assessment versus socially transmitted information.
Socially transmitted information, like the warning signals an enemy is sending them.
Exactly.
So if a nation has a low lambda, they care a lot about what the other side is doing. If you threaten them or send a carrier strike group, they update their behavior based on those signals.
Yes.
But if they have a high lambda, like approaching the number 1, they have absolute, unshakable confidence in their own internal belief system. They completely ignore any external signaling.
Now think about how this applies to Iran's fourth successor doctrine.
Oh, wow.
The briefing states that their decentralized mosaic defense is explicitly architected to keep their lambda near 1. They have total theological and revolutionary confidence in their own priors.
This totally reminds me of Thomas Schelling's classic game theory scenario, the game of chicken.
2 cars racing toward each other.
Right, and whoever swerves first loses. If Iran's lambda is near 1 and they mathematically ignore Western signaling, that is exactly like Schelling's tactic of visibly ripping your steering wheel out of your car and throwing it out the window before the game of chicken even begins.
You're forcing the other guy to swerve.
Because you have mathematically proved to them that you literally cannot change course. You have no steering wheel.
The dynamic is identical. Because they have thrown the steering wheel out the window, sending aircraft carriers or dropping bombs to send a message is mathematically useless.
They aren't processing your signals.
Right. When an adversary's lambda is near 1, the brief argues the U.S. choice collapses to a brutal binary.
Which is?
Either you degrade their military capacity directly, which we established is nearly impossible from the air against a decentralized system, or you accept the outcome. Those are the only 2 mathematically sound choices.
Wow. Let's bring all of this together. If you are an institutional client reading the CLG briefing in 2026, trying to hedge financial or strategic risk based on these global conflicts, what is the core advice?
The takeaway is stark. Ignore the press conferences.
Ignore them completely.
When politicians announce that a new ceasefire will lead to total denuclearization, or that a diplomatic plan will wrap a conflict up neatly by the end of the year, do not base your strategy on those announced outcomes.
Bet on the mathematical equilibrium.
Yes. Hedge your bets on mutual blockades, spikes in shipping insurance, and permanently frozen lines of contact.
Because the math doesn't care about the political narrative.
It really doesn't.
Which leaves us with a really provocative puzzle to end on.
What's that?
If the era of decisive World War II-style military victories is largely over, replaced entirely by these cold, calculated Nash equilibria of frozen conflicts and patience asymmetries, does that mean our entire cultural definition of winning is completely obsolete?
That is the question, isn't it? Perhaps in the 21st century, success on the global stage isn't about defeating an opponent in some grand cinematic way.
Right.
Maybe success is simply the ability to design a stalemate that you can comfortably live with for the next 70 years.
And if you scale that down, it asks a lot about how we handle our own personal and professional conflicts.
Oh, absolutely.
If you are a voter or an investor or just someone trying to navigate a stubborn dispute, are you exhausting yourself trying to achieve total victory, when maybe you should just be looking for the most comfortable equilibrium?
The game might feel incredibly emotional, but the board is governed by math.
It really is. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. And to our listener, keep questioning the information around you.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.